We're going to get started with our next session. You might recognize this speaker's voice. Stephanie is the co-host of the Bike Shed podcast. She's a ThoughtBot developer, and she has a great talk prepared for you here today. I'm honored to be introducing Stephanie Minn.
Hey everyone, thanks so much, Kevin. I am so excited to be here today and very thankful to be on the first slot so I can hopefully enjoy the rest of my conference without the anxiety of this talk. So we're just gonna go for it. So I recently learned about something called stages of change as a model. It describes how people navigate making a significant decision or change in behavior in their lives. I suspect my talk lured you into this room because you are somewhere around here when it comes to testing. In the contemplation stage, you are considering making a change, but might not know how to go about it. In the determination stage, you may be ready to take action, starting with some small, approachable steps. If you are indeed somewhere around these stages, then that is great for me because that means I have the best possible chance today to help you move forward from where you're at. Can I get a show of hands if you or someone you know struggles with testing and you're not really sure how to make it better? Yeah, okay, most people in this room, great, you're in the right place. If you're already a pro at this, this talk is still for you. I think we would be wise to better understand and empathize the experiences of our fellow colleagues. As a consultant, I embed in client teams dealing with complexity in their day-to-day work. It shows in their tests. The following may sound familiar. You read or write a test and you get lost along the way. You find yourself bogged down brute forcing a test to green. First of all, it makes sense that that feels painful, especially if you work in a large and complicated code base. What if I told you that you already have a tool for determining the next step? Our instincts are wise, and we would do well to become more skilled at listening to them. So my goal for this talk is not to prescribe solutions, but to encourage how you might be able to explore your own process for navigating a tricky test. Today, we'll work through an example realistic to many modern Rails apps I've seen. We'll articulate reactions provoked by the code, we'll learn how to adapt, and we will make space to experiment with change. Imagine we're building an app called Petreon. Yeah, it's like Patreon, but for pets. It's a platform for people to financially support their favorite pets in exchange for membership perks. This is my dog, Hickory. He has a page on Patreon to cultivate a community of people who want to shower him with love, affection, and treats. You can join the club on a certain tier, each of which comes with different membership benefits. A reasonable $5 a month gets you access to an exclusive album of cute pictures of him. Or you can go wild for the $100 tier, and I will personally cook him a steak dinner every month, and you can FaceTime with him because why not? And since I clearly know what the users want, I've also built the functionality to let Hickory fans try out benefits before committing. You can upgrade tiers on a trial basis. This happens via a class called Tier with Trial Upgrader that accepts a membership and a tier in its constructor. It has one public instance method called upgrade, which starts the trial and updates the membership tier. There's also some conditional logic. If the membership is on a subscription-based billing model, it updates that subscription with the trial that was started. This is perfectly serviceable code, if you catch my drift. In apps I've seen, classes like this will orchestrate procedural work. Maybe this code logs an event. It might enqueue additional stuff in a background job, business logic, what have you. Later, it turns out that subscription-based members are upset because they didn't get proper notification of their trial, and they want to know when they'll be billed next. So we find ourselves looking inside this condition And let's say we implemented a class called subscription notifier. It has a class method named notify trial started that takes in a subscription and a trial. We can presume that subscription is defined elsewhere in this file, and we have trial as a variable from earlier in this method. And since we introduced new behavior, we would like to write a test. For this talk, we are using RSpec Rails and FactoryBot as part of our testing toolkit. We navigate to the spec for this class and try. There's an existing test for the method and even the condition that we are targeting. Except it looks like this. I find it pretty overwhelming. Don't even make sense of this slide. Just don't even look at it. Let me tell you what I experience when I look at this code. First, I want to make a noise like, I don't know what to focus on. I am surprised to see names of collaborators that I didn't see at initial glance in the application code. And I'm confused about just arbitrary values in the test data. I don't know what is important and what's not. And I enumerate these feelings because once I do, I tend to observe them with less attachment. That helps me step into curiosity about what's going on rather than flail around in my grievances. If you've heard of code smells, they are hints that something may be off about the design of your code, regardless of whether it works or even passes a test. Developing a nose for code smells takes practice, but we already have an instrument to pay attention to, our own state of being. Remember how I mentioned surprise at seeing additional collaborators? It turns out that these two methods here were obscuring some implicit dependencies. Subscription is a memoized instance of the class Stripe subscription, which takes in a membership. And it turns out that the update method is called on the subscription. It accepts the names of tiers it's moving to and from, as well as the end date for the trial. Don't ask me why. This is just what we're dealing with. So our goal was to test the behavior we added. What now? The existing test was so difficult to read, and I suspect difficult to write, that we had to dip into details of private methods to understand what was going on. When you write a test, you are interacting with the code as a user. It's said that if testing is painful, you may want to reconsider the design of your code. That begs the question, what are tests for? Sure, they verify behavior and catch bugs, but if they give us grief and we don't know why, I think a mindset shift is in order. Sure, I'm of the opinion that we should write tests for ourselves and for each other, not for a green check mark. A good test tells you how the system works, how to use the methods available to you, what to put in and expect out, and any side effects that happen along the way. Think of it like leaving a torch in a dark tunnel. We pay it forward when we write tests with the intention that others will rely on them, including our future selves. So we find ourselves in the dark tunnel of the tier with trial upgrader class, a little lost, a little uncertain, and that's okay. It's not anyone's fault. What matters is what we choose to do next, how we find our footing. The main feeling I want to resolve is that overwhelm. How can I ground myself in this test file? I typically begin by reorganizing information. I might co-locate behavior by inlining references that are declared far away, such as in let blocks. I might flatten or nest, depending on what I need to situate the context of the conditions that are being tested. And in this case, let's start with a clean slate and write the test from scratch. Even though there's already an existing test for this code path, I would prefer not to be biased by what came before. This is our test now, and we can do whatever we'd like. You might feel nervous to do this. That's totally okay. It could mean you need a little bit more information before getting started with writing a test from scratch. Common sense tells us to get directions before we head off into the unknown. I suggest asking yourself a few questions. Do you know what you're testing? Do you know how to set up the object and method under test? Do you know how to get into the appropriate code path? If not, you may have a bit more work ahead of you. So once I've gotten my bearings, I follow the arrange, act, assert pattern for organizing my tests. This helps me keep track of where we've been and what we still need to do. So sometimes I begin with the assertion because this is information we should hopefully already have at hand. We wrote it in our test description. So in this case, we want to verify the behavior of the subscription notifier since it is a side effect and we don't have really a state to assert on. So let's mock our class and expect it to receive the method. Next, we construct the instance of tier with trial upgrader. To call upgrade on it, it needs a membership and a tier. So we provide those two arguments by building them with FactoryBot. And since we want to enter the condition of a membership with a subscription, we set the has paid subscription attribute to true. Lately, I've been finding it helpful to think about necessary versus unnecessary coupling. Coupling is the degree to which things need to change together. You may know it as something to avoid because loosely coupled modular software is easier to change. Some amount of coupling is expected in a test, however, because we need an entry point into our system. So considering the minimum dependencies required primes me to notice when coupling starts to unravel. So I think we would benefit a little bit from understanding where we're at now. So far, we've coupled ourselves to the class and method under test. Luckily, upgrade doesn't accept any additional arguments, so we don't have to set up anything else there. The arguments to new up the tier with trial upgrader, so the membership and tier, as well as the details that we needed to configure them to get into the right code path. And lastly, the class responsible for the side effect. And for now, that all makes sense and seems reasonable to me. However, we want to ensure that notify trial started is sent with the correct subscription and trial. So we use RSpecs with matcher to constrain our expectation. Now we have a problem. How do we specify these arguments when we don't have access to them in our test? Remember, a subscription is defined as a private method. So we instantiate it in our test. Unfortunately, in order to make an assertion on it, we have to swap it in by stubbing the Stripe subscription's new method to return it. There we go. Our test looks like this now. It grew a couple of lines, and I feel a bit uneasy about the RSpec wizardry we had to do in order to stub the subscription. I want to make a note of that feeling, but for now we'll move on because we still need to set up a trial. If you'll recall, a trial is returned by a class method called start on the trial model. So we build a trial with a factory. And again, we need to stub a class method in order to verify that the trial was returned and that it indeed gets passed to our notifier. This is where I begin to juggle a few too many things in my head, but we are so close. We are ready to run our test. And it fails spectacularly. Why? It turns out that updating a subscription actually makes a request to the Stripe API. That test failure can manifest in a couple different ways. You might see an error from Stripe itself. If your app uses webmock, you'll see a complaint about external network requests, or worse, like what we just saw, you will get an obtuse nil class exception because the code is so brittle that you simply can't run this test in isolation despite setting up everything in the class. Familiar to anyone? Sorry, this clicker is a bit finicky. Okay, so fine. We don't want to bother with subscription actually calling its update method in the test, and we plug that up here with another allow statement. And now, if you can believe it, we finally arrived at a green test. Though honestly, at this point, I'm pretty mad. That kind of sucked, and I've lost a lot of my steam. When I'm in this mood, pessimism blocks my critical thinking. When I try to push through it, I do worse work. I would like to interact with the code from a place of calm and not frustration. So now is an excellent time to take a break, grab a snack, and pet my dog. Look at this guy. Don't you want to join his Patreon? Yeah? $100 a month, anyone? Anyway, we come back to our test in its full glory a beat later, and it's passing. That's great. Let's take a moment to celebrate what we've accomplished thus far. In testing that notify trial started was invoked with the correct arguments, we made explicit the data required for the method under test. We unearthed some coupling to Stripe via the subscription model. And we learned how trials are started. In working effectively with legacy code, Michael Feathers introduces the concept of a characterization test. When writing tests for code you don't understand, the goal is not to figure out what it should do, but what it actually does. When you write tests that way, testing no longer is a moral authority, it's just a tool for facilitating the gathering of information. I like this framing because it encourages discovery as the primary goal. Even though we had some existing coverage, writing the test from scratch illuminated our code for what it was, whether or not we liked it. That brings me to my next point. Move at the speed of trust in your tests. If you don't have trustworthy tests, it's no surprise to me that fear of change lurks in every file. It's not enough for tests to fail if you don't understand what broke. So that's why I take the time to care for and restore tests. It's the quickest and safest way to observe the behavior of your application. Now that I'm no longer overwhelmed, I'm more clued into other types of friction. Let's say I start having to scroll up and down in this test file just to navigate it. That's kind of annoying, right? What started as a few lines has now taken up a lot of real estate. In other words, this class has grown additional responsibilities it may not be suited for. The upgrade method now has to start a trial, determine if the membership has a subscription, instantiate it, update it, send the notification, and update the membership as well. Write out responsibilities of classes and methods. It can be in a code comment or on a post-it note. This is a technique commonly used in domain-driven development, and I find it useful when I need to make sense of existing code. With that awareness, I'm not loving this change. The class already manages a lot of tasks, and my experience tells me that code like this only attracts more responsibilities. You know, you see that file and you're just like, oh, look, what's one more line? I'm not totally keen on merging as is because I don't think my work is complete. We've built up all this knowledge, so let's put it to good use. For me, that's a cue to seek out opportunities for improvement. With our trusty test in place, we can begin refactoring safely. Here is what our test descriptions currently look like. Their setups end up being quite similar, and now is a good time to ask, why does the duplication exist? In a previous life, before I was a dev, I went to journalism school, where I learned the value of brevity. I often find myself noticing redundancy. I've highlighted all the instances of the words subscription and trial. Is there a missing connection here? Are these operations maybe that have to happen together? I also want to follow up on the awkwardness I felt from allowing these messages. By doing this, we wave a magic wand over these methods so that they're not actually exercised. When these allowances make up the bulk of my test, I get dubious. How do I know that my code is integrated properly when I've just allowed all these shortcuts? That feeling should nudge you towards a more focused unit test. I chose an example with excessive stubbing because I think it's a common cause of pain. There's a different style of testing that involves creating all the objects needed to exercise the code fully. Rather than stubbing the update method, we could have set up some more collaborators until we reached some boundary of the system. Having to create many objects and likely corresponding records in the test database is a symptom of a similar problem. So while we're taking a different approach here, be wary of mystery guests that show up to the party in your test. So my doubt kind of turns my attention to the code in this condition. Isn't it surprising how these mere 2 lines ended up generating so many more in the test? And that leads me to inline the update subscription method like so. Now I can see clearly what all is involved. My eye catches on how we are exposing the tier name method on subscription. Wouldn't this be available from inside the instance method? If you get lost or distracted by seemingly irrelevant method calls, that's a signal. there may simply be too much information. And I had made a point earlier to keep an eye on extraneous coupling. This is what I was talking about. The failing test we saw earlier also reinforced that concern. We found ourselves deep in the guts of code dealing with the shape of Stripe's subscription API, and I know a rabbit hole when I see one. So this code not only leaks details about subscription, but tier and trial as well. With all this laid out in front of me, I wonder, is there a meaning hidden for me to discern? Can I distill this information into a single idea? Many people associate redundancy with applying dry, do not repeat yourself. I find that rule quite lacking in nuance. The point is not just to remove duplication. Dry requires sitting with ambiguity until you are able to express the truest and most precise abstraction with your code. Anything less risks obfuscating meaning, like we saw earlier. And to be clear, this is really challenging. It also takes time. I enjoy pairing with someone to talk through it. Doing so also develops a common language for the code you're working on together, and that's critical for sharing knowledge across the team. After giving a think, I landed on encapsulating the two responsibilities in a new method. We sprouted the idea of updating a subscription specifically in the context of a trial, as well as wrapped it with the intention of notifying, hence the name notified update with trial. This is another strategy I like from working effectively with legacy code. Wrapping methods lets us add new functionality to existing methods without modifying them. We've also introduced a new seam. A seam is a place that enables behavior to change. The one we've made here separates the class responsible for orchestrating the mechanisms of upgrading from, separates the class responsible for orchestrating the upgrade from the mechanisms of how it happens. And our seam dovetails nicely with another guideline, tell, don't ask. Previously, the code exposed information about the tier, subscription, and notifier. Instead of querying for those details, we simply tell the subscription to do a notified update. The best part is that we can basically move our existing test into the spec file for Stripe subscription with a few minor adjustments. And that leaves us with only one test needed for that condition in tier with trial upgraded. And for now, this is where we stop. I've been sitting with this example for a month now, and I still see areas for improvement, but perfect is the enemy of good, and that's a task for another day. This is what the method looks like now. You might be thinking that was a whole lot of effort for it to look almost exactly the same. Was it worth it? I believe so. The only way to deal with complexity is to manage it. We created an affordance for the emerging concepts related to subscription, and we prevented this class from growing another line, another responsibility. And we learned a lot and documented those learnings as collective wisdom in our tests. Building up that knowledge is crucial. It's only then can we shape change with creativity and clarity. Michael Feather says the biggest obstacle to improvement in large code bases is the existing code. But I'm not talking about how hard it is to work in difficult code. I'm talking about what that code leads you to believe. Code is constantly provoking reactions in us, for better or for worse. It doesn't even need to be old. It can be code you wrote 10 minutes ago. How we feel when we write tests is one of the quickest feedback loops we have about the quality of our system. If we ignore or numb ourselves to that pain, we end up losing faith in our work, or worse, we are told to do the dreaded rewrite. We need to find better ways of coping, because that test pain matters. Can you figure out what you need to do right now to attend to it? It doesn't need to be a sweeping refactor. Small actions add up, I promise. Even just reorganizing some stuff in a file, clarifying the name of a method or variable. That helps you, it helps others. And that's important so we can continue doing the good work of connecting pets and pet lovers on our obviously viable and profitable product, Patreon. To call back to the stages of change model from the beginning, I would be thrilled if I were able to help you today move even just a little bit forward towards determination and action in harnessing the power of your tests. If you're ready to dive deeper, I learned, referenced, and found inspiration from many, many resources for this talk. I'm excited to see a TDD for Absolute Beginners workshop on the schedule for tomorrow. If you have yet to try test-driven development, I highly recommend it. It's a great skill to have in your testing toolkit. And all of the talks that are in this room today go really nicely with themes around software design. So I will be staying in this room for sure. We talked some today about design patterns and heuristics. In fact, object-oriented programming picked up the idea of design patterns from the art and science of architecture, specifically the work of an architect named Christopher Alexander. He wrote a book, The Timeless Way of Building, that theorizes why design patterns work so well for us. And he says that the point is to invoke a quality without a name. He illustrates this idea by distinguishing the design of a courtyard that feels alive versus one that feels dead. A living courtyard is one that supports life. Its design enables our natural walking patterns, connects to open space with a view. It just feels good to be in. In contrast, a dead courtyard is one whose design fails to provide for the needs of the people in it. It might be totally enclosed, provide no shade. I'm sure that we've all kind of just been in a courtyard that's kind of like, oh, I don't know, try to get some fresh air, but I don't actually want to sit here. It's uninviting, and as a result becomes abandoned. Our human intuition can tell that difference when we inhabit the spaces, and the same is true of the code we work in. The tech industry loves being data-driven, but I personally find inspiration in remembering the purpose of best practices beyond what's clean or superior. It's something that no algorithm can quite capture. So Danilo Meadows in Thinking in Systems says, pretending that something doesn't exist, even if it's hard to quantify, leads to faulty models. Human beings have been endowed not only with the ability to count, but also the ability to assess quality. So let's not lose sight of that quality without a name, how we feel about our software. And since you're already writing a test, ask yourself what you need to find some peace and ease in that work, and then make it so. I'm Stephanie Minn. I work at a consultancy called ThoughtBot. You can hire us to help your team write joyful, maintainable tests. I host a weekly podcast about software development called Bike Shed. My co-host, Joel Kinville, who's sitting in the front row, is also giving a talk along with several other ThoughtBotters on Thursday, so do check those out. And I would love to know, sorry, I'll hold your applause for just a minute. I just admire this picture of my dog. I'd love to know what else you need to attend to your test vein and change code with confidence. If you have any feedback or thoughts, I will be around. Please feel free to come up and talk to me. I would really love that. And then maybe one day I'll launch Patreon for real, some early users in this room, yeah. And also maybe Hickory will learn to write my tests for me and make this talk totally moot, who knows. And that's it, thanks so much.